What's up, everybody? It's Spencer Alessi, and this is the Esports Narrative. What's up, everybody? I am super stoked to bring you episode 50 of the Esports Narrative. I can't believe I'm at episode 50. It seems like just yesterday that I was starting this. So if you've been a long-time listener or if you're a new listener, I super appreciate you. It means the world to me that you listen and take the time out of your day to consume this or listen to it, even if for a little bit, and then you turn it off. I just really appreciate your audienceship, your listenership. And this is an interview with a gentleman by the name of Lycan. He is a Rainbow Six pro. He's now a coach for Space Station Gaming's professional Rainbow Six team. And in this episode, we talk about his story growing up playing video games, how he got exposed to esports, and how he got into Rainbow Six. And then we dig deep into a little bit of the Rainbow Six details, such as the operators and the current meta of the game. We talk about destruction and the strategies around it, how to stay competitive, advice for new viewers of the game, how to clutch rounds, which is a really good conversation. Talk about the Six Siege Invitational and some things that Lycan would like to see change in the next patch, and some of his favorite things about the game. So this is a super fun episode. This is a game that I haven't covered yet up until now. This is the first time. He's kind of like the ambassador of Rainbow Six for the esports narrative. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I appreciate you listening. It means the world to me. If you enjoy this episode, give me a shout out on Twitter or leave the show a rating on Apple Podcasts or whatever you fancy to show support and show me that you like it or didn't like it. It would mean the world to me. Thank you so much. Let's get into the show. Hello. Good morning, good evening, good night. Welcome to episode 50. This is pretty cool. Episode 50 of the Esports Narrative. I am your host, Spencer Alessi, and this is the podcast that's all about the exploration of competitive video gaming and the passionate communities that make it so exciting. And joining me this time is a gentleman that goes by the name Lycan. He is at Lycan R6 on Twitter. He is the coach for Space Station Gaming's professional Rainbow Six team. He's a 5-time pro leaguer, 2-time CL champ, a Navy vet. He's on Twitch at Lycan R6. Lycan, thanks for joining me tonight. I'm super excited to talk about some Rainbow Six stuff.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited because this is a game that I've seen here and there, but admittedly I've never really dove deep into just as of until recently when I noticed the buzz and the hype of the 2018 Six Seas Invitational that was just happened in February. And I want to talk to you about that in a little bit, but it's just something that I've seen that's come on my radar. And before we get into the deeper stuff, I'd like to know first actually about your Twitter handle. So tell me the story behind your Twitter handle, and is that like your gamer tag as well?
So as of recently, it is, now my Twitter handle. So my original gamer name that I've used since I was about 15 or 16 was Lycan, and recently changed it to just Lycan because people were pronouncing my name wrong, like Daily Can and different stuff like that. So basically, Lycan, I was a big fan of the Underworld movies when I was a kid. And if you know from those, the werewolves in that movie were called Lycans. Yep. So that's where my name originates from. So when I was 15, I decided I wanted to be the werewolf, so I went with the Lycan.
Nice, I like it. I like the shortened up too. Like it's cleaner. I like it.
Yeah, it's had a positive. Like a lot of people joked about like changing it for the pronunciation, but I do agree. I think it's a little bit better.
So what's your earliest memories playing video games? Like, take me back to growing up. Like, what do you remember playing first as far as video games go?
So my dad has always been into technology. Growing up, he did a lot of coding and stuff for heating and cooling systems. So we always had video games around the house. He talked about me playing Zelda games with him on NES and stuff. I don't really remember that too much. I was young when I was doing that. The first things I really remember are playing Sega with my brother. A bunch of different games, Sonic, and I remember there's an X-Men game that we did play a lot. That was like a scroller. And then when I really started getting into video games was Mario Kart and Diddy Kong Racing and stuff like that on the N64.
Yeah, Mario Kart was legit. That was those were some fun times.
Yeah, I still, even when I was in college in the fraternity, we used to have Mario Kart tournaments and stuff like that, even like way past its prime. So it's a great game.
You play Mario Kart in the Wii at all?
I don't have a Wii. So I was a console player all the way up until I was about 18, basically when my parents paid for me to play video games. And then once I could pay for my own, I've had a computer ever since, and I've played PC games, a lot of first-person shooters, and then I played Dota and League of Legends as well.
Awesome. So esports, when did esports first come on your radar?
When I was in high school, I played SOCOM on the PlayStation, and that's really when I started getting into esports. Played on a thing called Game Battles for a really long time on SOCOM, like 1, 2, and 3. And then when I bought my PC, I played CounterStrike. We actually created our own tournament system called for Scouts and Knives, because it's not very big, but there's like this small cult community that really like to play Scouts and Knives. So I did that too. Yeah. I wish so. That's the first time I ever really was in big tournaments, was in Scouts and Knives. One, like, back then $100 in a tournament was really big. So that's the first time I really remember like being a part of a team, practicing, learning different strats, was from Scouts and Knives.
So you kind of cut your teeth on the Counter-Strike era, and at that time, was it 1.6?
Yeah, 1.6. Yeah.
I remember. I'm a longtime Counter-Strike player. I remember 1.6. I remember Scouts and Knives, and I even remember it being like low gravity or something like that.
Yeah, you could hop around really quick and spin, and like if you hit corners, you could go faster. So there's a whole strategy to all of it.
Yeah, it was super cool. So you were a Navy vet, and I'm curious. Have there been any lessons that you learned in the Navy that you've been able to apply to gaming and kind of being a professional gamer?
Yeah, so in the Navy, you pretty much run the same schedule every day. Like every day has maybe something a little bit different, but the framework for every day is very strict, and you always got to show up at the same time. You can't leave until like certain things get done. So discipline and like being able to live by a schedule are two like huge things you learn in the military. So taking that into my professional gaming career, practice always starts on time. People aren't showing up late. You're making sure that X, Y, and Z gets covered every practice, and you're always ready, like for all the possible outcomes for your match.
So talking about like your coaching role, tell me a little bit why, or share why you decided now was a good time that you wanted to transition to coaching. Like, were you kind of burned out from playing or competing, or did you just want to change a pace? Like, I'm curious of like the thought process of why now getting into coaching.
A lot of it probably has to do with my age. I'm 30. This month I'll be turning 30 in a couple of days, actually. And I've been playing competitively in Rainbow Six for a really long time, and I feel like I'm known throughout the community as a higher tier player. I most probably would say like high challenger league tier player. I've made a lot of teams that have made run at Pro League, but it pretty much came down to the point where there was a lot of open spots recently for teams, and I wasn't really getting the tryouts that I wish I would have got. So it was kind of like seeing, okay, so it's probably my time. I still really want to be involved in Pro League. So if this is the way that I do it and I can teach other people like what I've learned in the game and be more of like a mind of the game instead of a player, then I'm more than excited to take this role.
Yeah, and you told me that you've been playing Rainbow Six since the game came out. That's right?
Yeah, so at the time I was actually playing Heroes of the Storm because I was a League of Legends player, and I was kind of looking for something new and different. And this is like the first time a first-person shooter game has taken on the idea of operators that have abilities. So it took my love of shooting games and the love that I had for like League of Legends and Heroes of the Storm at the time, and put it all into one thing. And so I was like, I have to play this game.
That's a perfect segue to my next question. I was just going to ask you how you got into Rainbow Six, but you just covered some of that. Is there anything else? So you saw the operators, you saw the different like characters that you could play, and there are different abilities and specialities. Is that really the gateway for you, or was there anything else that kind of hooked you once you started playing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what drove me to try it on the first place and try to get like into the alpha and beta was the fact that these operators had abilities. So like other shooting games, you just pick your gun and then you just go to battle. But this game, like you actually have to think, and like the whole team needs to bring a team that works together with all their different abilities to win a round. That's what like the strategy is what really got me interested.
Yeah, and from what I hear, and you alluded to this as well just a second ago, is that you don't have to necessarily be the quickest shooter or the most accurate player, because from what I've been learning and just diving in recently, Rainbow Six is a lot about strategy and tactics more so than your aim, right? So how does that kind of play in and kind of change the flow of the game or the pace of the game?
Yeah, so a team is usually brought up with a mix of a couple support players, a player that can really do about everything. We call them a flex player, and then two like fraggers. So those would be your guys that you see in normal shooting games that are just killing everybody and getting all the kills on the scoreboard. But the support players are really, I think, what makes this game. And they have in Rainbow Six, you have drones that you can use to run around the building and like spot your enemy and then tell your teammates where they're located so they can go and get the frags. So those are really important and different from every other game. And so when you're building a team, if you just build your team with five guys who can just frag everybody, then you actually are losing part of the game. And those teams have been seen to fail constantly because they don't pick up all the information that's needed to win rounds.
So what's with the operators? You mentioned the supports and flex and fraggers. Is there like a current meta or a meta rather of operators, and what does that kind of look like right now in the current state?
So we just currently had an update. So we're on the outbreak patch, and it's hard to say right away because we're only 2 days into this current meta. So two new operators were introduced with global abilities. Before, you really just had an ability that only you had, and like you could help out like maybe one of your teammates, or you could just put down utility to help win the round. But now these global abilities affect all of your teammates or all of the enemy. So the game is really being turned on its side because now we're going to have to figure out if both of these operator abilities are worth bringing to a team. But there's always operators that will that have been brought since the beginning of the time. So there's an operator called Smoke, and he basically uses poison gas to create an AoE area of denial. There's operators like Ella, who's a pretty new operator. She's kind of being taken away from the game a little bit. They just nerfed her. So there's operator, like the meta right now isn't really formed, and we probably won't see it really formed for another month. But big thing usually teams will do is they'll have their support player on a character either called Hibana or Thermite, and they are what's considered a hard breacher. So when you're on defense, you can put up reinforced walls, and these characters can break. These two are the only characters that can break down those walls. So you always have to bring either Hibana or Thermite. And then from there, really, it just depends on your strat. You can bring shields, you can bring smokes, you can bring snipers, and it really just depends on the map that you want to play and how you want to attack the bomb site.
Yeah, so I'm getting educated a little bit, and from hearing what you're talking about with the barriers and stuff like that, in Rainbow Six, you could blow up walls and you could knock down doors and things like that, and they call it destruction, right? So what are some of the keys to a good destruction strategy? Like you mentioned, there's two operators that have the ability to knock down those reinforced walls and things. What's a good destruction strategy, or what are some things that you look for when you're playing to kind of combat or work with destruction and things like that?
So there's two different mindsets. So there's a lot of garage walls on some of the maps that are right connected to bomb sites. So you'd bring your hard breacher to be able to allow you to walk straight into the bomb site. And then also defenders are getting smarter, and they're putting some of these reinforced walls that are outside of the site to help protect their roamers stay alive longer in the rounds, and then they can flank late into the round and hopefully stop the team from planting. So you would use hard breaches on those walls if you want to start creating line of sights. So, and that would be in the purpose of if you open up one of those hard walls, you kind of pin the defender into a corner, and then you work with your teammates to flashbang them and pick up that kill easily.
So that's interesting to me. With the competitive state of the game, and I'm curious on your take. I saw this a little bit on the Rainbow Six website, and it kind of piqued my interest as something that would make a good conversation point. And it was related to how do you stay competitive at a game like Rainbow Six that's clearly constantly changing. You know, there's new metas, there's new weapons, there's new abilities that these operators are having, like you mentioned, the global abilities. How do you stay competitive at a game like this?
The best way is to be a student of the game. There's a lot of games that are also first-person shooters that really the meta is insanely stale, which is nice for a viewer because they always know exactly what's going to happen. So they probably aren't confused. You know, you have your set smokes, you have your set flashes, everyone's running the same gun. You throw all your stuff, then you run into the bomb site, you get the kills, and then you put the bomb down for a plant. Rainbow Six is completely different in the way that the whole map, nearly all of the map, is destructive. So people are always finding different angles to find different ways onto the bomb sites. So if you're not constantly learning, constantly seeing what other teams are doing, constantly scrimming different teams to get different ideas, then you fall behind and you're not relevant anymore.
Do you find that you're surprised at all, you know, during matches or just online play by how creative some people get? Like, do you find that you're still surprised by things, or you have a pretty good grasp of what to expect as the round progresses?
I'm at a spot where no matter where a team is going or how they're going about it, I know what their end goal is based on where they spawn, where they're clearing. So I know what the end result is going to be, but every team has their particular way of attacking a bomb site, and every single time it can change just a little bit with operator selection. And that's where the game is surprising and exciting because it's never the same. And so even though you're if you take Oregon, for example, if they all spawn on this street in Junkyard side, you're like, okay, so they're most likely going to be trying to plant in Laundry. But you don't know exactly how that execute's going to look until they start doing it. So that's the really exciting thing about this game is, for a new viewer, it might be hard to watch, but as long as you listen to the casters and you just see what's happening, this game has so much growth compared to others because it's always evolving.
So I do want to touch on that in a second, to the point of, new people watching it or new viewers watching it. But I just wanted to touch on something just a minute ago, which relates to the meta and the operators. Is counter picking a thing? Anytime you have specific classes of characters or heroes, in League of Legends or Overwatch and things like that, there's sometimes counter picking, or there's classes that you can run or operators you can run to counteract the opposing team. Is that something that's pretty common, or is it something that's not really done a lot?
It's very common. So there's a lot of operators in this game that can accomplish the same task, but they do it differently by just a little bit. And the example I'd give you is if you were to pick Buck or Sledge. So if a team starts bringing Castle on defense, and basically Castle, what he does is he puts up a barricade on the door that you can't just punch down or shoot down. You actually have to find a way to remove it by either like throwing a nade on it, for example, will kill it, or you have to punch it so many times and it'll fall down. So that gives like the defense a little bit more protection, and it stalls the round out a little bit. Now, if you brought Buck and you threw grenades at it, then you'd waste your grenades. But you can bring an operator called Sledge, and he has a sledgehammer, and you can sledge the castle down, and you keep your grenades in hand. So defenses are constantly trying to surprise the attackers to stall out rounds, and the attackers are trying to adjust their strategy to make sure that they can still accomplish their same task. That's why the operators are different by just a little bit. They can still accomplish their same task, but they can get it done quicker.
Right. And is the loadout of the operators for each team known like ahead of time? Does like each team see the opponent's operators picks?
So with the Six Invitational, they did announce that you will be able to see what the other team is bringing to the table, but there's going to be one pick that you can hide. It'll be like a trick pick. So it'll look like you're picking someone else, and then you have it hidden because it's not actually the one that you're playing. But in the past, up until that point, until that's not out yet, but once it does, but before that, you could not see anything that the other team picked. The only way to find out what they picked was to either hear their gun, because each operator has a unique gun. And as a professional player, you know what each gun sounds like. So if you hear them shoot, you know who they're playing. Or if you use the cams that are around the map, you can ping them and you can show your teammates, hey, they're bringing a thermite, or hey, they're bringing a Thatcher. But other than that, at the top of your screen, everyone starts out as a question mark. So you didn't know.
Now, I want to touch on the advice for new viewers of R6. And the first thing I want to just ask about is, do you think the complexities of this game make it difficult for someone new to the game to kind of spectate it or watch these tournaments?
As far as being a new spectator, I definitely think the first couple minutes that you're watching it is difficult because you don't understand all the operators, and you might not understand that like only certain operators bring grenades. So you can't just pick, hey, I want grenades, or I want flashbangs, or I want smoke grenades. They're actually a set thing for each operator, what they bring. So for instance, Sledge, he has grenades or flashbangs. You can't bring breaching patches, or you can't bring smoke grenades. So when you run a strat, you need those certain operators, but a new viewer wouldn't know that. The casters do a really good job at constantly trying to explain the things that wouldn't be necessarily known by a new viewer. But Sledge, just like any other, or Siege, just like any other first-person shooter, is pretty straightforward. You see the bomb sites. You understand that a team is trying to get down to the bomb site and plant the diffuser, and you have to try to break your way through the 5 defenders to get there.
So in competitive play and in tournaments and things like that, are all 3 game modes played? That being, was it the bomb, secure area, and the hostage? Are all 3 of those played, or is there or specific ones that are only played?
So right now, and I think probably for the future as well, only bomb is played. And there's a couple reasons I consider that. So for instance, secure area, when you actually enter into the secure area room, it's notified to everybody that's in the map that there is someone now trying to secure the secure spot. And there's a lot of strategy that's kind of broken down because of that, because you know exactly where a guy is now. So it's not essentially wall hacks, but you pretty much have the upper hand on the guy who steps into the room. And then hostage is the same thing. Once you pick up the hostage, everybody knows that the hostage is picked up. So a lot of people consider bomb to be the ultimate game mode in Siege, just due to the fact that you can walk to the bomb site and you can plant the bomb, and the defenders don't know the diffuser, and the defenders don't know until the diffuser is planted that you're even there. So unless they have vision into the bomb site. So I think pretty much for the future of the game, I think bomb is really the best game mode to provide like competitive action on. If they change up the other game modes, maybe we'd see them, but I don't think we'll see them for a while.
So you don't think there's a chance that the game modes would change, kind of like what Call of Duty does? They have different game modes and they play them throughout. You don't see that kind of happening for Rainbow Six?
No, and only because Rainbow Six is a different monster than most games, in that being that there's so much destructibility that if you were to have to learn strategies on 9 different maps for 3 different game modes or 2 different game modes,
right?
And then you're also talking about each map has 3 or 4 sites that you have to learn strategies for. I think it would be overwhelming, and honestly, the level of competitive play would go down because that you're asking a lot of a player.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like trying to master multiple games at that point,
Exactly.
Now, talking about strategy, one thing that I thought was interesting on the Rainbow Six website as well, they talked about clutching. It was a really interesting video. I wanted to get your take on clutching and kind of like, how do you clutch around? Like, what's your strategy when it's like 1v5 or 1v4 or whatever it is, like, and you're the last one alive? What's your strategy for clutching that round?
So the big thing when it comes down to clutching is you need to have been fully downloaded onto what's happened in the round, because the first thing you have to do is you have to get very aggressive on the person who's closest to you that's away from everybody else. And they talk about it in the video, and it's an insanely smart point, is you have to create as many 1v1s as possible before the team groups up and realizes that now, hey, this guy has a chance to win the round. Like, we're dying way too fast. So the first thing you need to do is turn and get to somebody that you know you can successfully kill and hide from the rest of your team. And then a lot of the things that'll happen from there is usually one team has one guy that usually is like softer spoken than the others that can relay you call outs quietly, so you can still hear footsteps. You can still play your game and tune them out if you need to. And you'll like have either cameras available or they know where they died and where the guy should have rotated to. And then you just trust your team's call outs and try to make it happen.
So who is the best team? Well, let me rephrase. Who's the team to beat this year? Maybe not the best team, but like who in the pro league, who is the team to beat that would be, the biggest, for any team? Let's say any team were to beat this team, this would be a big milestone for that team. Like, who's the team to beat this year?
I think the teams that always have the biggest, they're always considered the ones to beat. Those 2 teams would be Evil Geniuses and Penta for NA and EU. And then anytime they get upset, it's big news to everybody. But you got to remember with the meta changing and teams, if teams stay together for a long enough time, they're always a threat. So off the bat, on a new season, I wouldn't put anybody ahead of anybody else, to be honest. They're all pro teams. They all deserve to be there. And we did see last year, Evil Geniuses, they were known as Continuum then. They won the 6th Invitational. And then the next season came, and they didn't even make it to LAN. So Rainbow Six is one of those things like we were talking about earlier. If you're not constantly evolving and constantly being a student of the game, teams can beat you. So if you're not stepping up to the level that everyone else is competing at, you're going to fall behind and you're not going to make it to the big tournaments.
And you mentioned a team from NA and a team from EU. I'm curious how you would rank the different regions in Rainbow Six.
I think it'd be unfair to just basically go off of the 6th Invitational. It was an NA and EU team that did end up in the finals. But I personally feel that Brazil probably is the best region. They didn't perform and get into the finals, but collectively, if we're talking about the skill of each of their teams, I think that they are the best region right now, followed by EU, then NA, and then the APAC region. EU and NA is very close, and it's always been extremely close. And like I said, any game, any team can win. But if I was talking about the overall quality of the teams that are put together, not necessarily the players, but the teams who have put players together, a full 5, I'd say Brazil is the best region.
So what's your favorite thing about Rainbow Six? Like, what is it that, ultimately has kept you playing it this long and being a part of it this long? Like, what really gets you going about it? Or like, what's your favorite thing about this game?
The strategy. This game has, I'd like to say, the MOBA strategy. You can bring so many different things. You can do it so many different ways. But then you're talking about a shooter, which is what I've always loved growing up, is a 5v5 non-respawn game where it's tactical and you have to be smart, and if you die, it matters. Like, the second you die, you're off the round, and you have to hope that your teammates can make up for your mistake. So the strategy that comes with this game is seen in no other.
What would you like to see changed in subsequent patches? Like, if there was something that you had the ability to change, something that you had the power, like, to hit a button and change it, like, what would be that one thing that you would change?
It's one of those things where I probably am like, this is always something that needs to change. If I had to change one thing, probably they kind of came close to it with the announcement at the 6th Invitational. So it's kind of bittersweet because I was excited. So before, attackers and defenders, you swapped every round. So you did an attacking round, then you'd have to go defend one of your spots, and then you go back to an attacking round and so on. But now they're going to make it so you have 5 attacking rounds, and then at the end of it, you do your 5 defense rounds, and it's a first 1 to 6 wins. I personally have always wanted in this game to have more rounds and timeouts involved in competitive, because the game before was first to 5. Well, if you lose 3 rounds, you've only really seen a little bit of what the team has to offer, because you're always switching between attacking and defending. So when you're down 3-0, you're not out of it yet, and that's your mentality that you should have. You're telling your guys, like, this is what we need to do, this is what we've seen, like, this is how we fix it. Now something bad happens, now you're down 4-0, and you're like, man, I wish we could time out and talk about it. But when it comes down to it, you now have to have a massive swing to come back and even win, and the other team only has 1 round before you're out of it. So I've always wanted there to be more rounds involved, 7 to win, and timeouts involved. So they've taken the first step in this matter, and now it's 6 to win instead of 5 to win. So the games are prolonged a little bit, so you have more time to develop a counter strat mid-game, which brings more strategy into the game, which is exciting. No timeouts yet, but I hope that comes soon.
Do you think that they're kind of influenced, or to some extent looking at the success of CounterStrike with, the way that their rounds are put together with the timeouts and things like that?
I don't know if you've noticed, but I've actually tried to not say that game very much while I've been talking. And the reason is because I truly believe, and so does most of the people in the community, that this game cannot be that game. Because what's the point? There is already that game involved, right? So Rainbow Six and the developers, which I'm glad, have always stressed they are Rainbow Six. They are not any other shooter. They developed this game with breachable walls, and you can see through all these different sight lines that aren't always there. You can create them on your own. And yeah, I mean, when you really talk from a broad standpoint, their successes are important because you have to follow a certain way to get viewers and for people to be excited. But when it comes down to it, Rainbow Six is really trying to do it their own way. And I think it's really commendable that they're sticking to their guns and they're really trying to make this game different and its own.
I agree completely. I think that was one of the first things that almost caught me by surprise is, coming from someone who's never really been exposed to this game before. You think of a shooter with, with automatic weapons, semi-automatic weapons, military style. You think how different can this be from everything else? There's a lot of thoughts that run through your mind. And when I started looking into the game more and more lately, that was one of the first things I noticed was it is very unique of a game. It seems like it is truly developed without the sense of any other influence put on it. And I think you can only do that if there's a blind eye turned to those things. So I definitely can appreciate that and respect their take and their perspective on how they're choosing to develop the game.
Yeah, 100% I agree.
So the Rainbow Six, the 2018 Six Siege Invitational, it was incredibly outperformed the first one that was last year. I believe the I don't know the exact number of viewers, but according to the report that I read, it more than tripled its peak and average concurrent viewers for that event from the year before, which is phenomenal. I think it was a $500,000 prize pool.
Correct.
So, I mean, just an incredible prize pool, an incredible amount of viewers. It really probably provided a lot of validation for the community and for the developers. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on that as far as like how well it did, exposure wise and tournament wise, and how do you see this being kind of like another step forward into becoming more and more of like a mainstream esport?
Yeah, really the whole situation, it really is a dream come true for a person that loves the game, because it's really tricky for people who don't know what it's like to be on a competitive team and to try to get sponsorship to play the game that you enjoy playing. And it's a vicious circle. So the big organizations won't get into your game until the viewers are there, but the viewers don't really show up until they see the big organizations in the game. So it's since
chicken and the egg.
Right. Ever since year one, season one, when I started playing this game, and there was 1,000 views watching like season play, and that was big for us. We were so excited about it, but it's a long way from that because not every team was even sponsored by a real organization. I up until the week before Year One Season 1, I was playing for my own team. We created a name, we created a picture, and that was it. And then Astro Authority signed us last minute, but it was so hard to find anyone to support us because the game was very small. But now with the bigger orgs coming into it, people are starting to recognize the game, and it's taking off, and it's great.
Hey guys, just jumping in here after the fact. Unfortunately, the last 4-5 minutes of this episode got cut off. I record with something called Craig. It's a Discord bot that automatically records on 2 different channels, so it's easy for editing and things like that. Well, unfortunately, it bugged out the last 4 minutes. So here's a little recap of the last 4 minutes. I asked Lycan about the biggest shift he's noticed in Rainbow Six Esports, and what he shared was the operators and the ever-changing nature of the game is one of the biggest trends or the biggest shifts in Rainbow Six Esports, because that can completely change the game. Like the new operators that just released with the global abilities, it can completely change the game and kind of really change up the strategy quite a bit. And that's one of the biggest shifts he mentioned for Rainbow Six. Lastly, he wanted to shout out Space Station Gaming and really just give a shout out to the community and the developers of Rainbow Six, Ubisoft, and the community in general, and to everyone that supports the community. His shout outs definitely go a long way to say that the Rainbow Six community is definitely one that's unique. And I definitely agree with that sentiment, is that when I first looked at this game and saw this game, it definitely seems like something that's unique, that the developers truly try to create something and continue to develop something that's unlike other games that you've seen out there, and kind of give a different look than what you might expect from a shooter. So with that, I apologize. These last 4 or 5 minutes were super good, but unfortunately my chat bot got bugged out and the recording screwed up, so it was only the last 4 minutes or so. I hope you guys really enjoyed this episode, and with that, just want to remind everyone that if this all goes as planned, this show is just the beginning.
Thank you, listeners. I really appreciate you. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave me a rating on iTunes. I would love a 5-star, but if you think I deserve a 1, let me have it and tell me why.